there are thousands of men and women who are able to appreciate Western culture in all its facets. There are also many Westerners who reject their own cultures of freedom, who cultivate fundamentalism, collectivist dogmas, and a naive and romantic belief in the merits of pre-medieval life. They're called anthropologists mainly. That is completely perverted. My grandmother's culture, as I like to call it, or I have come to call it, differs from the culture I encountered in Holland in many ways. But I'd like to discuss only the three that I consider to be the most important. One, the individual versus the group, that difference. The second difference is that between men and women and the position of women in society. And finally, the state versus the group, the clan, and the state and religion. That's all intertwined. In tribal Muslim societies, the rights of the collective are far more important than those of the individual. Group survival depends on the ability of individuals to conform. What we are required to conform to, unlike you, are customs, habits, traditions, and superstitions that have been practiced by our forefathers and their forefathers. Islam was founded in an Arab tribal desert society in the 7th century. It unified different groups who were fighting. It elevated those ideas and customs that were considered to be good to divine level. For instance, the concept of honor and shame was a regulating mechanism and still is the regulating mechanism in Arab tribal society in the early centuries. Islamic theology, founded by an Arab man, Muhammad, decreed any shameful behavior to be sinful. But it was a shameful behavior that was already considered shameful. Whatever the tribes considered honorable, he declared virtuous or godly behavior. It is honorable for an individual to do everything that will improve and will advance the interests of his family and his clan or tribe. The only addition that Islam made is, instead of limiting the clan or the tribe to blood relations, it created a new tribe or polity called the Ummah, a polity of believers. Loyalty, after Islam was founded, was no longer enforced by an appeal to the bloodline, but by an appeal to God. Group norms were made divine and now considered revealed truth from God. By founding Islam, Muhammad united his tribesmen, but preserved in many ways their tribal way of life. The tribal way of life is very different from what we now call the open society or Western society. And I find one of the biggest differences to be that between men and women. Everything in tribal life centers around female sexuality. For a tribe or a clan to be strong, to be the one to hit first, to conquer, to prosper, to expand, the male must be confident that the children he's raising, especially the boys, are of his sperm. Revenge is a very powerful instrument. And in a culture of aggressive conquest and counter-conquests, the single most important anxiety is revenge. You are always looking over your shoulder to see if someone you've slighted or members of your kinship have offended are about to stab you in the back. Vigilance and treachery are the arts of survival. The concept of enemy, of insiders and outsiders, of us and they, is very, very strong. Women are seen to be the weakest link. And often you marry the woman of tribes you have conquered, and they may not forget that, the women. Conflict does not have to be between your intimate tribe and a faraway tribe. It can be between two brothers, two cousins, second cousins. To ensure that you will not be betrayed by your own child, you have to be certain that you are the sole master of the wombs of your women. So much importance is put into the virginity of brides. The Muslim marriage contract makes a distinction between virgin, divorced, and widow. You will not understand it as an outsider unless you understand the tribal context of this, that your entire survival depends on it. Girls and women are programmed with safeguarding their virginity, their wombs, denying their sexuality. It's the price of honor the woman has to pay. If she doesn't, she will not be protected. Worse, she could be killed. So when you and I recently, when you as Westerners learn about practices such as female genital mutilation, forced marriages, the confinement of women, the veiling, you have to think about these things in that context, patriarchal, tribal culture. So there is that difference between the individual and the collective, men and women. And then finally, I come to the third aspect, which is the state/clan/religion. After the decolonization process, the Arab Muslim countries that were so-called liberated had the notion of the state-nation was imposed on them. And this happened without going through a process of detribalization. The institutions of the mother country, the model society of the mother countries, to which only a small group of elites educated by Westerners had been introduced. But society at large was not groomed to accept this. When members of tribes or clans are dissatisfied with the nation states, as they inherited them from the British, the French, and so on, they fall back on the bloodline. Fathers and sons, brothers and cousins. That's where you seek your survival. Survival is mere subsistence, and it leads to a burning desire for salvation. And salvation is provided by Islamic theology that simplifies the world into us versus them, and into an array of do's and don'ts. The leaders of the established nation states use Islam and Islamic theology as a way of preserving their authority. The opposition to them uses Islamic theology to declare them un-Islamic. The mechanisms of acquiring power and proposing an improved form of society all goes through Islamic theology. The state and religion become one. When I lived in Somalia and in Saudi Arabia, and even in Ethiopia and Kenya, the world was bipolar. There was a balance of power between the Soviet Union and the United States. I grew up in a home where we were politically literate because my father was a politician. And every time some of my relatives would defend the merits of American democracy, others would defend the merits of the communism of the Soviet Union. But the majority of my relatives, my kinsmen, my neighbors, would always defend the merits of the clan and pronounce how supreme Islamic law or Islamic Sharia was. Then I came to Holland. I came to Holland because I did not want to be a wife to a man who was only interested in my womb as a factory of his children. And the products of that factory would be boys or girls. If they were girls, he would take another wife. And not only would I be his slave, but he would always look at me with contempt for bearing girls. In our first meeting, he said, "You are going to have 6 sons for me." I was in search of something I didn't know. I just had a clue of it. Me as more than just a vagina or a womb. Me as my mind, as my skin, as my dreams, as my goals. Me as a contributor to society besides getting pregnant and giving birth. My sister used to say, was more rebellious than I was, I have not lived because I have not mattered. And I wanted to matter. And that's the first difference between the West and where I come from, which is the place of the individual versus the collective. How much can I matter? And how much can I matter without causing the group, my collective, my community, to think of me as mattering too much to silence me? And how much could I matter as a female without causing fitna or chaos? And how much of me and how I wanted to matter was God's business, my family's business, or mine? The answer that Holland gave me was, well, darling, they call you schatje, it's little darling. We don't care about your womb, it's yours. Conform to society, not on the terms of the bloodline, but on the terms of paying taxes, participating as a volunteer, participating in government, taking part in demonstrations, writing critical articles, but do not rock the boat too much, which unfortunately for me, I did. Probably because as Somalis, the only boats that we are familiar with are used to pirate. I didn't know at the time. Holland is 6 feet underwater, and all they can talk about, all idioms are related to water. I couldn't even swim when I got there. Still can't swim. The relationship between individuals and the group, between men and women, between the state and religion is extremely different when it comes to the West and Islam. It's also different in an interesting way within the West. For instance, between America and Holland. Americans are more individualist, the Dutch more conformist. American women and men have a different idea of equality between men and women. The Tocqueville noticed it, 200 years ago? It's a hole in my knowledge. They tend to marry more than the Dutch do, for instance. And Americans are always solving problems, where many Dutch people simply resign and accept their situation or just leave it to the state. And the state is less prominent here in the United States in the lives of Americans than it is in the lives of Dutch men and women. The differences between America and Europe are not so dramatic as to cause between them any war, but there are differences in quality of life, and perhaps a theory which you can test and see which one lasts longer. The differences between Islam and the West, on the other hand, the values of Islam and the values of Islamic theology, measured by using as criteria the position of the individual, the relationship between men and women, the nation state, and the place of religion and the tribe, is not only different and not only an interesting difference, it clashes, and it is clashing now as we sit here.